humans, their home planet, and even their home system, has a god of death. That's why there's a statistically significant amount more death in Earth's life cycle than everywhere else, and why the average life form from that planet lives a shorter life than you might expect given its size. Both the humans and the galactic community at large were rather surprised to learn that the god of the humans is one of death, for different reasons. Apparently, the humans did not know for certain that they had a provable god, and this revelation triggered a large amount of religious restructuring, their words not mine, on their home planet that obviously resulted in a lot of death. I do not pretend to understand human religion, but from what I hear, it was ultimately decided that the god of the humans, being a god of death, was not necessarily contradictory to what was previously believed by most pre-existing human religions. Again, I don't profess to understand it. Go ask a human. The galactic community, on the other hand, was merely surprised to learn that a god of death existed. Given that gods of fertility, birth, life, rebirth, and even decomposition, read nature but edgy, existed already, having one of death to complete the cycle wasn't necessarily out of the question, and the only reason it was generally theorized to not be possible was because surely we would have seen one by now. So, after sorting out their internal issues in their normal way, humanity joined the galaxy, and everyone moved on with their lives, before humanity left the limelight as a planetary system, with 3 sapient-bearing planets, jointly ruled by a god of cooperation, emerged round about 30 standard years later. Humanity very quickly became a footnote, a species that had its deity as a previously doubted thing, came from a more deadly planet than usual, and who were somewhat contrarian pacifists, which still works because death comes for us all, etc. Then, of course, as will eventually happen to everyone, including the pacifists, the humans got themselves into a war. The galactic community as a whole was still expanding. It had originated around the galactic core and had gradually expanded outwards. The humans found themselves on the far edge of known space, in a direction that proportionally few cared about. So when a generic expansionist empire, led by another one of the dime a dozen war gods, whose designation doesn't even deserve capitalization, showed up on the fringeward side of known space right next to the humans, the latter inevitably took the brunt of the first attack. The community, used to this stuff happening, sent the obligate amounts of military aid and commiserations on some colonies getting crumpled. Then, it turned out, because of course it did, that this generic expansionist empire was actually significantly larger than was first imagined. So instead of just wiping another GEE off the map and calling it a day, the community found that it was actually in for an actually challenging fight, for the time being. Resultantly, the humans would have to be at the forefront of an actually even fight, until the never-ending river of reinforcements being sent in their general direction by the community could reach critical mass, which, of course, meant that we got to see the humans fight. And we watched in real time, as the humans unlocked abilities even they didn't know they had. I'm just going to go off on a tangent for a moment. In human media, one notably prevalent theme is that death, especially after a long life and especially if it is final, irreversible and definite, is ultimately a mercy. It's quite easy to understand where that's coming from, and by that I don't mean existential crisis up the wazoo, but it does bear mentioning that humans have it more commonly than anyone else. My point is, I don't think that anyone really understood what that truly meant, and why that truly was, until we saw it being granted as such a thing. There is, of course, only so much that an inability to die gives you. The universe doesn't care that you can't die if a nondescript bundle of superheated matter, moving at a reasonable fraction of the speed of light, turns you into atomic mist. But, obviously, there are also times when the universe can be forced to care that you can't die. It's horrifying. That's what it is. Even to them. To know that you should be dead, but that you aren't. Because some horrifying higher power is keeping you alive, or perhaps merely not letting you die. To know that you have to experience all that pain and suffering, with your instincts and senses screaming at you that everything's wrong, and your brain actively trying to short-circuit, it is not something that most humans would wish upon their enemies. And yet, in war, they wish it upon themselves. And what do they do with this power? Well, what do you think humans can do with such power? If it's at all realistic, they've probably done it. Human brains are technically 2 in 1, so if one half gets utterly destroyed, that's how you find out that a human only needs half his head to shoot a gun. Someone cracks open a human vessel like a nut and vents the atmosphere. Congratulations, humans don't need an atmosphere to work a gun anymore. You see that rock floating in space? Surprise, is also a gun. No need to stave off boredom and hunger, if a corpse can't get bored or hungry, is there? There are way too many stories of humans taking fatal damage and being refused death until their gun is empty, the battle is over, or all their enemies are dead. Way too many. You could make a career out of documenting and sorting all of them if you really wanted to, and were that boring of a sapient being. And this is from one war they weren't the only participants in. I shouldn't need to go into any more detail here. There are just that many. Apparently, this came as something of a shock to this particular war god, who either hadn't done enough research or didn't care enough about the ramifications. So, when critical mass was achieved and quickly breached, and the GEE was squashed like the bugs they metaphorically were, they were amphibians apparently, and the war god who instigated the whole thing was captured and trialed. You could, allegedly, if you look past the contempt, rage, seething hatred, and general lack of brain, see the recently created trauma in her eyes. Well, before judgment was carried out, anyway. We don't know what happened because that's not something the gods speak about. My guess is execution because, she attacked death. But in the end, it's just as good as yours. Now that trauma only exists among those in the know, those who perhaps truly saw just how bad it was for death to refuse to let someone die.